My name is Emma Neary, and I'm a patient research partner with Imagine. As a longtime patient and more recently a medical student and researcher, I hope to share my perspective with you on why I believe that patient oriented research is important. Like most other 20-year-old girls, an important part of my morning ritual consists of doing my makeup while scrolling through my Twitter feed to get the latest updates from notable influencers and, of course, the Twitter doctors. Among some of the interesting threads in the Twitter scientific community, I've noticed a general trend of misconceptions surrounding patient oriented research. To simplify matters, I'll characterize this divide as two clinician camps. More recently, I've seen tweets pertaining to the idea that investing too heavily in patient oriented research may interfere with important projects that involve out of the box thinking. Such technical research may seem insignificant now, but may eventually lead to breakthrough cures. I'll call these the utilitarian physicians. On the other hand, what I would refer to as the Kantian clinicians would argue that focusing too heavily on basic science won't tangibly help suffering patients. But what I believe is missing from this picture is that patient-oriented research is not black and white. Instead, I believe that it is a careful balance between satisfying the interests of both clinician camps. Rather than creating a divide between patient interests and clinical questions, patient-oriented research strives to unite both to work towards a common goal. In my eyes, it aims to achieve this by using patient feedback as the foundation for research hypotheses, rather than regarding it as a simple afterthought. In other words, instead of going from bench side to bedside, the goal of patient-oriented research is to go from bedside to bench side. This may seem like we're just giving translational research a makeover. However, this switch has profound implications that need careful consideration. For instance, in practice, the switch will often raise the questions, why and how should patients even be involved? To materialize this question, let me draw an analogy. When you seek financial advice and assistance, your accountant will be the expert. Ideally, they'll manage your financial health and educate you about what financing strategies fit best with your lifestyle. Imagine how you would feel if suddenly, whenever you visited an accountant, you were told that you must give your paycheck directly to them. They would then decide where you can afford to live, what clothes you will buy, and when you will retire. As a customer, I'd find that very frustrating, and as a patient, sometimes it feels no different. In a 15-minute consultation, it is extremely difficult for a physician to form a partnership with their patient to discuss values, beliefs, and goals pertaining to their health. In the face of symptoms and treatments, in my experience, research seems to fall by the wayside in clinical encounters. This is where Imagine comes in. Let's take a moment to jump back to our Kantian and utilitarian clinicians. I hope that we've concluded that patient-oriented research involves harnessing everyday patient struggles to formulate novel research questions. However, to establish the most pressing struggles of IBD patients, we need to empower them with knowledge and give them the platform on which they can advocate for their own needs as well as the needs of the broader IBD community. Imagine provides patient research partners with this voice, allowing for both clinicians and patients to shape research and care as collaborators. I have to admit that I stumbled upon Imagine by chance when I first started working in electrophysiology at the Gastrointestinal Disease Research Unit. Every morning when I was making solutions, I'd hear chattering among the other researchers about how patients were doing and how recruitment was going for the various studies. Among a group of individuals working with cells and mice, I hadn't expected to hear so much talk about actual patients. Upon further inquiry, I became connected as a patient research partner. Through the network, I've been able to explore the motivations behind patient recruitment and retention, a problem that I first encountered in my lab, but as I learned, it affects all of the studies in the national network. The best part about this study is that it's run entirely by patients. Rather than being passive observers of research, Imagine empowers patients to take matters into their own hands and move things forward. For physicians and researchers, leveraging patients' skills is a strategic way to accelerate studies. As a patient, it's extremely satisfying to have a sense of control over an illness that impacts you, your family, and your friends every day. I hope that I've established that the most immediate impacts of patient-oriented research involves the generation of relevant research questions and the triaging of projects. However, I believe that patient-oriented research has a broader reach that can be summarized into 3 pillars that include informing treatments, sharing education between physicians and patients, and finally, influencing policy. As someone who was diagnosed with IBD in 2014, my lived experience was all that I'd ever known. When I started my first year of medical school, suddenly it was engraved into my mind that the patient is always a they. Currently, that means that I'm in limbo between being an I and a they. Initially, I thought that I would lose sight of my patient perspective when I saw things from the other side, but I now feel that my own experiences with the healthcare system has added flavor to my medical education. Sometimes I feel that I'm living in the third-person omniscient tense. My own education has made me a more inquisitive and objective patient, but it's also shaped me into a slightly skeptical medical student. In medical school, we study incremental schemas that look like this. But in real medical appointments, the schemas look more like this. Although we may learn about each of the individual factors associated with each illness, it's difficult to put these into a bigger picture. Trying to keep patient preferences in mind while juggling the complexities of illnesses requires a lot of time, which is not always feasible in our healthcare system. When you're living with a chronic illness, many subtle and unintuitive challenges often arise. Without having the disease yourself, these sorts of challenges would be difficult to tease out and address as a clinician. It's for this reason that patient-oriented research has a key role in educating physicians on the most favorable treatment approaches in the face of many options. For instance, such patient interactions are keystone in the development of clinical practice guidelines. In a field like gastroenterology with many emerging treatments, it is especially important to have timely insight from patients to allow physicians to consider treatments on the basis of both the quantity and the quality of patients' lives. Not only will this improve the lives of patients with IBD, but it will increase compliance with treatment, resulting in a decreased burden on the healthcare system as a whole. In addition to informing treatments, shared education between patients and practitioners helps to direct research projects, promotes the spread of evidence-based research, and empowers patients to be advocates in their own care. When patients sit side by side with researchers and physicians, a more holistic but evidence-based approach can be taken in the development of projects. Such a process can be encapsulated by a notable research dilemma in nephrology, addressed by the James Lind Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on patient-oriented research. For many years, nephrology research only focused on emerging treatments for dialysis patients. When researchers started experimenting with the James Lind Alliance approach, they finally involved patients in the research process and were surprised to hear that the patients ranked their number one research priority to be the mechanisms underlying the sensation of itchiness that they experienced during dialysis treatments. Although patients were thankful for the dedication that researchers had in working towards optimal treatments, funding a project surrounding this itchiness drastically improved the quality of life for many patients. While practitioners may benefit from the quality of life perspective given by patients, on the flip side, patients benefit from involvement in emerging evidence-based research. The presence of patient leaders at research meetings can spread accurate and reliable information throughout the IBD community. In turn, patients can become more empowered in their own care. Many patients are diagnosed with IBD very suddenly and receive a lot of information at once. When I was a newly diagnosed teenager, of course, I turned to Google to get more information. In hindsight, I didn't do that bad of a job at filtering through information, but I had no access to credible sources. Instead, most of the information that I encountered was some version of Jenny McCarthy's 10-step GMO calorie-free diet that guarantees to cure Crohn's. Or worse. I only realized how badly I lacked access to evidence-based information when I was given a university library account, and I nearly stayed up the entire night reading through the IBD page on Dynamed. The lack of access that patients have to evidence-based information is astounding, and I believe that much undue harm could be avoided if patients were empowered with more educational resources. By welcoming patients into the research community through patient-oriented research, accurate information about current research and potential treatments will trickle down and become accessible to the IBD community as a whole. Among the many positive aspects of patient-oriented research, I'd like to emphasize the importance of its impact on policy. As a young patient, it is difficult to know what processes take place to facilitate your treatments and cover the expenses of your medications. Usually, this is something that a patient does not need to ever fully understand, nor should the burden be on the patient to navigate this complex system on their own. However, as medicine and healthcare is inherently political, upstream healthcare policies can have profound impacts on patients. In these situations, the best solution to fighting against such changes is to involve a team of patients, researchers, and physicians that advocate for a cause together. The most pressing example in the IBD community is the forced switching from infliximab to an infliximab biosimilar, Inflectra, in British Columbia and Alberta. Although this is a complex situation involving the interplay of health policy, finances, and medicine, it could be likened to an event which has recently occurred in my hometown, St. John's, Newfoundland. In 2018, without warning, the provincial government installed a large wooden fence along the iconic Signal Hill, one of Newfoundland's most popular tourist destinations. The intent of this fence was to block the view of historical plays run by the Department of Tourism, which bystanders reportedly viewed without buying tickets. The government believed that this fence would save thousands of dollars on lost ticket purchases. However, as a result of the fence, the view of Signal Hill and the Narrows was completely blocked. Without public consent, an important community resource was taken away and citizens feared that tourism would plummet. Thankfully, citizens and tourists came together to protest the fence, and they finally convinced the government to remove it. Before the paint even dried on the fence, it was being torn down. It will never be known how much revenue was lost in manpower to this fence, but we do know that the government has announced that the removal of the fence has already cost $65,000 alone. We may not have known that the fence would have such profound impacts on the city. It was a poorly planned knee-jerk reflex to the prospect of saving a few dollars. Unfortunately, the consequences of this decision resulted in unmeasurable loss of profits and frustration within our community. In my opinion, the construction of the Signal Hill fence parallels the beginning of this Inflectra switch. It's only a matter of time until we know whether this switch will cause similar unforeseen and unmeasurable impacts, but this time on the lives of IBD patients. For this reason, we need patient-oriented research to form a team of evidence-based research champions consisting of patients, caregivers, physicians, and researchers. Now is a time when patient-oriented research can have this profound impact on policy. I hope that today I've shown you not only what patient-oriented research is, but also what it is not. I believe that the premise of patient-oriented research is in part a realization. That realization is that our job in medicine is not limited to ameliorating a patient's biology. Medicine is about achieving comfort and giving patients a sense of control over their own bodies. To do this, we need to explore patient preferences, We need to give them options, and we need to let them advocate for their own causes with the knowledge that they deserve. And with that, I'd like to conclude with a quote from Atul Gawande that I believe embodies the premise of patient-oriented research. The quote reads, "You may not control life circumstances, but getting to be the author of your life means getting to control what you do with them." Thank you.